Welcome to this edition of Meet America. I'm Annie Griffin, your host, and today we're going to be talking about where did terrorism begin? And I think we're pretty confused about that. A lot of Americans are, because we get so many different reports from the news media, and we don't know who to trust and who not to trust and all that. But I'm going to try to do my best to make it as simple as possible and choose what I feel is probably the most objective. Doesn't mean it is, but at least I'm trying. And then how are we going to combat it individually in this country? I really believe that Americans need to follow what the Swiss are doing and prepare ourselves and arm ourselves. Not be afraid to arm ourselves, not to listen to the voices that say, oh, if we have guns in our houses, we're all going to shoot each other and our neighbors. I really don't think the majority of Americans are like that. Yes, there will be those kind of people, but those kind of people are doing it now. So thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it.
Oh dear, just when you thought the Iraq problem was solved because you haven't heard about it for a while, everything's back to murderous chaos and terror. What happened? In 2003, the US invaded Iraq because of its alleged connections to terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. At the time, Saddam Hussein, a brutal dictator, ruled the country. He was part of the Sunni minority and suppressed the Shia majority. Iraq was conquered fairly quickly, but the US had no plan for the country. The until then suppressed Shia majority took over and began oppressing the Sunnis because suppressing other faiths has proven to be such a good idea. Unsurprisingly, a Sunni rebel uprising began, and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda trickled into Iraq, and local forces, often former Sunni military, began fighting the US troops and the newly formed Iraqi state, peaking in a bloody civil war in 2006. Since then, people in Iraq have basically been segregated by religion. So, in a tragic irony of history, the US invasion led to the formation of the very terrorists the US wanted to eliminate in the first place, because Iraq was now the perfect training ground for terrorism. To understand this complicated conflict better, we need to understand the relationship between the two main branches of the Muslim faith, Shia and Sunni Islam. Sunnis make up about 80% of the Muslim world, and Shia about 20%. And the hardliners on both sides don't like each other very much. Saudi Arabia and Iran are the two most powerful players in the game of faiths. They both have no separation of state and religion, domestic problems, and a lot of oil money. And they support groups that fight the other religious orientation. And one of those terror organizations supported by Saudi Arabia was the Islamic State in Iraq, or ISI for short. In 2010, the Arab Spring happened and changed the whole situation in the Middle East. In Syria, dictator Bashar al-Assad didn't think much of resigning and started a gruesome civil war against his own people. The longer the war went on, the more foreign groups joined the fight, most of them for religious reasons and with the goal of building an Islamic State in the region. And one of them was the infamous ISI, which now became the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. They had fought in Iraq for years and had thousands of well-trained and fanatic soldiers. They already quasi-controlled parts of northern Iraq and were very determined to build their religious state. And they changed the game in Syria like no one expected. ISIS was so unbelievably violent and radical that soon it was at war with almost every other faction of the Syrian rebel armies. They attacked and killed members of other Muslim terrorist groups. In the territories they controlled, they built an Islamic State with rules so strict that even the hardliners of Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia were shocked and withdrew their support. ISIS has been accused of responsibility for multiple massacres against civilians, countless suicide bombings, the hostage-taking of women and children, the execution of their prisoners and beheadings. All kinds of medieval horrors we would rather not have to illustrate. And this lovely gathering of human beings recently decided it was time to take more territory in Iraq. Since the US left Iraq, the Shia Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has monopolized power and discriminated against Sunnis wherever possible. The government of Iraq is widely regarded as being corrupt, incapable, and it's certainly hated by a large part of its citizens. The Iraqi army, consisting of about 300,000 soldiers, was created using $25 billion in tax money, but it's not loyal to its government and has been withdrawing or completely disbanding, giving up city after city. Because ISIS has announced that everyone who opposes them will be killed, they have proven they mean business. By June 2014, they'd conquered a big chunk of Iraq, including Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. They'd stolen hundreds of millions from captured banks, making them the richest terror organization on earth. And they are constantly working on establishing a super medieval religious state. Iran and the US are even considering working together to fight them. That's how gruesome the situation is. Events in Iraq show again that exploiting the people you've defeated in a war, denying them power, a living and a stake in the rebuilding of the country, is just sowing the seeds of the next bout of violence. Somehow, we have to break this circle.
Now, war is terrible, but we, the United States, is equally guilty of horrendous acts of terror on the Iraqi civilians who were caught in between the war and were killed. They were incinerated. They were bombed. I mean, what can be worse than that? We may try to trivialize what we did in comparison with what ISIS is doing. Because ISIS is smaller, they have to be more visual. If the media would show how visual our war in Iraq was, I'm sure we would say it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They are, ISIS, Sunni, are just trying to defend their country just like we're trying to defend our country, what they believe is their country, what we believe is our country. So what I'm trying to say is it's all horrible, and how are we going to stop it? How are we going to prevent the backlash that is going to come to the United States? So now I'm going to show you nuclear bomb suitcases and missing plutonium. Where are they? Who has them? And how is it going to affect us here in America? And how is our next president going to take care of that situation? I think this is a question we all are asking, and I'm going to do my best to see what we can come up with. Thanks for watching.
That if you don't want to use the military to maintain the peace, to do the civil thing, is it time to consider a civil force of some kind that comes in after the military, that builds nations or all of that? Is that on your
I don't think so.
radar screen?
I think what we need to do is convince people who live in the lands they live in to build the nations. Maybe I'm missing something here. I mean, we're going to have kind of a nation-building corps from America? Absolutely not. Our military is meant to fight and win war. That's what it's meant to do. And when it gets overextended, morale drops. But I'm going to be judicious as to how to use the military. It needs to be in our vital interest, the mission needs to be clear, and the exit strategy obvious. I think what we need to do is convince people who live in the lands they live in to build the nation. At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
My name is Jason Hurd.
My name is John Michael Turner.
My name is Mike Preisner.
My name is Sergeant Christopher Sean Goldsmith.
My name is Hart Vigis.
My name is Jason Wayne Lemieux.
Do you think that the U.S. or UN forces should have moved into Baghdad?
No.
Why not?
Because if we'd gone to Baghdad, we would have been all alone. There wouldn't have been anybody else with us. It would have been a U.S. occupation of Iraq. None of the Arab forces that were willing to fight with us in Kuwait were willing to invade Iraq. Once you got to Iraq and took it over and took down Saddam Hussein's government, then what are you going to put in its place?
I served in central Baghdad from November of 04 to November of 05.
I served with Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines.
I was attached to the 173rd Airborne Brigade, deployed to northern Iraq.
I was 19 years old when I was deployed to Iraq.
I served 3 deployments to Iraq.
I was deployed to Kuwait in February 2003.
That's a very volatile part of the world, and if you take down the central government of Iraq, you can easily end up seeing pieces of Iraq fly off. Part of it the Syrians would like to have to the west. Part of eastern Iraq, the Iranians would like to claim, fought over for 8 years. In the north, you've got the Kurds. If the Kurds spin loose and join with the Kurds in Turkey, then you threaten the territorial integrity of Turkey. It's a quagmire.
Armed forces of the United States are engaged in a struggle that will determine the direction of the global war on terror and our safety here at home. The new strategy I outlined tonight will change America's course in Iraq and help us succeed in the fight against terror. It is clear that we need to change our strategy in Iraq. In our discussions, we all agreed that there is no magic formula for success in Iraq. So I've committed more than 20,000 additional American troops to Iraq. The coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm.
Individuals from my unit indiscriminately and unnecessarily open fire on innocent civilians as they're driving down the road on their own streets.
On April 18, 2006, I had my first confirmed kill. This man was innocent. I don't know his name. I called him the Fat Man.
When we came around a corner and an unarmed Iraqi man stepped out of a doorway, I remember the Marine directly in front of me raising his rifle and aiming at the unarmed man.
He was walking back to his house, and I shot him in front of his friend and his father.
The next thing I remember is stepping over the dead man's body to clear the room that he came out of.
The first round didn't kill him after I had hit him up here in his neck area. And afterwards he started screaming and looked right into my eyes.
There weren't any weapons in the area except for ours.
So I looked at my friend who I was on post with, and I took another shot and took him out.
He watched the commander, who had given us the order to shoot anyone on the street, shoot 2 old ladies that were walking and carrying vegetables.
We were walking by a woman's house. She was outside in her garden to work. We had our interpreter with us, and our interpreter threw up his hand and said, "Salam alaikum." It means peace of God be with you. And he translated back to us what she said. She said, no peace of God be with you. She was angry and she was frustrated, and so we stopped, and our interpreter said, "Well, what's the matter? Why are you so angry? We're here protecting you. We're here to ensure your safety." And that woman began to tell us a story.
We were outside of Baghdad, this water treatment plant. It seemed like a pretty nice area.
Her husband had been shot and killed by a United States convoy because he got too close to their convoy.
As we were leaving, 2 men with RPGs run out in front of us in the road.
The rules also explicitly stated that carrying a shovel, standing on a rooftop while speaking on a cell phone or holding binoculars, or being out after curfew were automatically considered hostile intent, and we were authorized to use deadly force.
He was not an insurgent. He was not a terrorist. He was merely a working man trying to make a living for his family. To make matters worse,
screaming, "Drop your weapon, drop your weapons." They had RPGs slung on their backs.
The standing rules of engagement for my unit were changed so that Marines didn't need to identify a hostile action anymore in order to use deadly force. They just had to identify hostile intent.
The Special Forces team got some intelligence that this woman was supporting the insurgency. And so they conducted a raid on her home, zip-tied her and her 2 children, threw them on the floor. And I guess her son was old enough to be perceived as a possible threat, so they detained him and took him away.
I swung my rifle around, had my sight on the dude in the doorway.
For the next 2 weeks, this woman had no idea whether her son was alive, dead, or worse.
And when I looked at his face, he wasn't a boogeyman. He wasn't the enemy. He was scared and confused. Probably the same expression I had on my face during the same time. He was probably fed the same BS I was fed. Put myself in that situation.
The enemies you confront will come to know your skill and bravery. The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military.
After going to Iraq, I quickly learned that it wasn't at all like I thought it was going to be. The people of
Folks, I believe there's more, as a lot of people do, to this war than just going in there and trying to free the people. Why aren't we in Africa, you know, and freeing those people, you know? No, it's about oil. And it all boils down to the people who are using too much oil in the United States. In other words, people who are driving these huge gas-guzzling SUVs because they want to feel safe. I think it's time that we became warriors, America, in every sense of the word. That means you don't drive those big gas-eating cars. You think every time you get into that car and you are going to the gas pump and using all that gas, what you're doing in the Middle East, what you're doing to our planet. You're killing it. Now, if every person just got 26 miles to the gallon in the cars they were driving, it is estimated we could save 1 Alaska refuge per year. That means we wouldn't have to drill in the Alaska Wildlife Refuge for a year. So that's saving a lot of gas. And I think, I'm not speaking of those people that are, you know, driving smaller cars that get that kind of gas mileage. I'm talking about these big pickup trucks, not the working people that have to drive those kind of trucks, but the big people, the people who don't need to drive such big cars. They make it dangerous on the road for everyone else, and they're not that safe, and they take more of their share. So America is taking more of our share, and it doesn't matter who we kill in the process. So getting out of your cars, taking the bus, supporting mass transit, supporting trains, supporting smaller cars sends a big message to the car companies, and it also diminishes greatly our need for using gas. It also diminishes global warming and the pollution of global warming. So even if you don't believe in global warming, the massive amounts of, you know, small particles we are breathing into our lungs and the consequence of lung cancer as a result, this all is karma. This is all cause and effect. And so it's really time, America. We are fighting a war. We are in World War III. And we are killing ourselves off. We're killing ourselves off with the cell phones, with the cell towers, with the pollution, the massive amounts of pollution, with fracking, with going to war, with uranium mining, with using too much resources. So you really need to look at yourself and say, what can I do to diminish that? You know, and be a warrior. Combat this war by doing that at home. Because this, what you're seeing, is your fault. It's a result of too much consumption of our resources in every sense of the word. And eating meat is number one. For every person that eats meat on this planet, the amount of rainforest and U.S. forest land that has to be raised because of your beef habit is millions and millions of acres a year to provide corn and soy to feed those animals, and it's all genetically engineered besides. So we're either part of the problem or we're part of the solution. And how are we going to fight terrorism in this country? It's going to come number one from you getting out of your big gas guzzlers and getting smaller cars, using less of the resources. That's number one in every sense of the word. Your diet and how you drive and how you get to places. That's number one. I want to thank you for watching. We're now going to watch a segment on suitcase bombs. Where are they? Where's those little lost nuclear suitcase bombs?
Would you have time for one round of questions from the
Of course,
members?
yes.
I know you're very busy.
To oversimplify, there are three main lines of defense against these emerging weapons: prevent the theft or diversion of weapons usable material, As a consequence of the collapse of the Soviet totalitarian command and control society, a vast potential supermarket of weapons and materials of mass destruction has become increasingly accessible. The disintegration of the Soviet Union and the subsequent decay of the custodial system guarding the Soviet nuclear, chemical, and biological legacy has eliminated this proliferation choke point. States and even religious sects, organized crime, and terrorist organizations can now buy or steal what they previously had to produce on their own. And others are correct. The dangers are here and now.
It's Sandy Bastian of the American Foreign Policy Council. Sandy, thank you for being with us.
It creates situation that this ministry really will. I met one people whom told me several years ago, yes, do you know that exists such a small size of nuclear weapons like suitcase? I was surprised and cannot believe. But he told me, I made it. 100 nuclear specialists. Such a strange situation. At the end of the story, I am absolutely sure that it has been made, but I don't sure that it exists just now. Such a situation.
To somehow back Russia into a corner. This hearing is not being called because I want to portray Russia as the evil empire, because none of those things are true. This hearing is called because if we're going to have a stable relationship, it must be one built on transparency, on candor, and on an honest effort in both countries to deal with problems that could affect the people in Russia as well as the people in my home state of Pennsylvania. Chernakam edition of the Russian Federation Academy of Sciences.
While the possibility of a nuclear missile being launched is still slim, a new, much greater threat has just emerged. During the Cold War, Russia manufactured over 100 nuclear warheads housed in briefcases. Today, over half of them are missing. Russian strategic missiles have the range to hit America or Europe. Tactical missiles are for local battles. The Russians have another nuclear device which is potentially more dangerous than any tactical or strategic weapon. The suitcase bomb. Easy to move, easy to operate, but hard to identify. They can be detonated anywhere. This man was Boris Yeltsin's science advisor. After becoming a key player in Russia's nuclear policy, he recently discovered the existence of the suitcase bomb. His name is Alexei Yablokov.
Маленькие атомные заряды существуют, совсем маленькие, несколько десятков килограмм, 30 килограмм, 40 килограмм. Они существуют. Я говорил с людьми, которые их делали. Я видел их.
From briefings given by Alexei Yablokov, we were able to build a model of the suitcase bomb. On the outside, it looks like an ordinary attaché case. Inside, it contains a timer wired up to a miniature nuclear warhead. The warhead consists of a plutonium core surrounded by explosives which produce an extreme increase in pressure, precipitating a nuclear explosion. The system is activated by a key and can be set to detonate from anything from under an hour to several days, enough time for whoever planted it to clear the vicinity.
Мощность такого маленького ядерного заряда около килотонны, 1 килотонны. Это очень много. Это значит 1000 тонн обычной взрывчатки.
The bomb was designed to destroy key parts of the enemy's infrastructure, such as entire bridges or airports. But 1 kiloton, a 16th of the power of the Hiroshima bomb, could have a devastating effect on a city.
Весь британский парламент превратился в пыль. Вокруг, если это будет взорвано на Пикадилли, то, наверное, километр вокруг Пикадилли будет одни развалины, ничего там не будет больше.
The blast would flatten almost all buildings within a 500-meter radius of Piccadilly, immediately killing up to 20,000 people. There would be further destruction and approximately 50% fatalities up to at least a kilometer radius. Within hours, the prevailing wind would carry the nuclear fallout as far as the M25. The whole of London would have to be evacuated. Congressman Kurt Weldon is heading a public inquiry into the danger posed by the suitcase bomb.
You'd have a massive loss of life, you'd have massive radioactive contamination, and you'd have massive havoc, unlike any that we've prepared for in the past. I would argue that the potential for a small atomic detonating device is even greater than the possibility of an accidental launch of a long-range ICBM.
The launch of intercontinental ballistic missiles is supposed to be governed by security codes. In contrast, suitcase bombs require no such codes.
Ведь не президент решает, где, в какую минуту, в каком месте взорвать эту бомбу. Получается, что тактическое ядерное оружие находится под меньшим контролем, чем стратегическое оружие. Мощность его много меньше тактического, но контроль тоже много слабее. Поэтому оно сейчас для общества становится очень опасным.
Midnight for a rendezvous in Moscow. Among the many military people privately voicing their concerns about the security of nuclear weapons is an officer directly responsible for weapons storage. Since he's serving in the army, it was necessary to conceal his identity. In 1996, Sergei, as he chooses to be called, tried to make his own storage sites more secure.
Сейчас эти объекты, конечно, хотят снабдить современными средствами, техническими средствами охраны для того, чтобы исключить проникновение на территорию объектов или...
He said his job was to account for 132 as the chief advisor for defense to Boris Yeltsin. He said he could only find 48. We were startled. We said, General, what do you mean you can only find 48? He said, that's all we could locate. We don't know what the status of the other devices were. We just could not locate them.
Lebed was promptly sacked from government after just 122 days. He's now left Moscow for Krasnoyarsk, a huge province in Siberia where he's recently been elected mayor.
So how do we defend ourselves from this kind of threat? Nuclear suitcase bombs, and also just regular terrorists that happen to do random shootings. If the American people were armed, were allowed to carry guns, as opposed to being greatly prohibited from doing so, we would have a better chance to combat these terrorist attacks. And I think that's one of the reasons why Switzerland doesn't have the enormous gun violence that we have in this country. So let's take a look at the different views, what is happening in Switzerland, and take a look at the different perspectives as far as having guns. In actual fact, guns have saved more lives in America than guns have killed. But the media doesn't seem to want to talk about that. They just want to talk about how many people have died by gun violence. Well, how many people have died by car violence or knives? So I think it's time Americans were growing up and able to start practicing how to use their weapons if they need to. We're sitting ducks right now.
And now we must turn to the issue of gun violence in America today, because the latest mass shootings in Aurora, Colorado, and Newtown, Connecticut leave us all, liberal and conservative, Republican and Democrat, appalled and disgusted at the carnage. Now, some people, and that includes many of you in this room tonight, want to place the blame for this horror on things like 30-round magazines or semi-automatic rifles. We want to blame something, anything that we can control. But what we really want to ban is violence and murder and insanity. Now, we don't talk about that, though, because deep in our hearts, each of us knows that violence and murder and insanity are built into the human condition and likely always will be. You know, there are two kinds of animals in this world, predators and prey. No one watches a leopard chase down a gazelle and denies that the gazelle has a right to use its hooves and horns to protect itself from the predator. But there are people in this room tonight and all across the country who would deny that same right to self-defense to other human beings. Such people seem to think that the way to stop the leopard is to cut the horns off of the gazelle, that by somehow making it easier for the predator will simply go away. My friends, this is insane. When you make it easier for the predator, you get more predators. So let's start with the so-called assault weapons, more properly known as semi-automatic rifles. In 2011, the total firearm murders came to 8,583, according to the FBI. Now, during that time, the total murders committed by rifles, all rifles, not just semi-automatic rifles, were 323. That's 3% of all murders. Hammers and clubs kill half again as many people as rifles. Hands and feet murder twice as many. And knives kill 5 times more Americans than all rifles combined. Preventable medical errors kill about 98,000 people per year. Medical malpractice kills more than 12 times as many people as are murdered in the U.S. each year. That's more than 300 times the number killed by all rifles, not just the so-called assault rifles. And yet, no one talks about limits on hammers or knives or doctors or hospitals. No one does that because the good we perceive from hammers and knives and doctors far outweigh their perceived harm. And yet, studies show that firearms prevent anywhere from 800,000 to over 2 million violent crimes every year. The lowest estimate means that 100 times more violent crimes were prevented with firearms than the total murders committed with firearms. That's 100 times as many. Now, in October of 2007, Amanda Collins was walking to her car after a night class at the University of Nevada at Reno. Amanda had a concealed carry permit for her 9mm Glock that she carried for self-defense. Unfortunately for Amanda, UNR is, like most college campuses, a gun-free zone. So, like the law-abiding citizen that she is, she did not have her gun with her in this gun-free zone when she was attacked by James Bila. Bila raped her on the UNR campus less than 300 yards from the campus police office. He then walked away, and a few months later, this human predator went on to murder 19-year-old Breonna Dennison. Amanda Collins went on to say, quote, "I know, having been the first victim, that Breonna Dennison would still be alive had I been able to defend myself that night," unquote. Therefore, I am directing the virtual Attorney General to aggressively challenge any gun control laws that violate Amanda Collins' right not to be raped and Breonna Dennison's right not to be murdered. You're not forced to abandon your First Amendment right when you enter Chicago or New York, or your Fifth Amendment rights when you walk onto a college campus. As virtual president, I will veto on the spot, without hesitation, but with a great deal of pleasure, any and all attempts to destroy any of the Bill of Rights, of the Constitution of the United States of America. Because, when it's all said and done, the Second Amendment to the Constitution is not there to protect us against criminals, and the people calling for gun control know this. That's why they want gun control instead of crime control. That's why they want laws that, at the stroke of a pen, turn law-abiding citizens into criminals. The Second Amendment is there to protect the American people from tyranny. The Second Amendment is there to protect the American people from politicians. The Second Amendment is there to protect the American people from us. Now, Some politicians claim America deserves a vote on this issue. Okay, let's have a vote. Those of you advocating infringement on the right of the people to keep and bear arms need to go to the American people with the 28th Amendment, which would simply read, the Second Amendment to the Constitution is hereby repealed. That would, for the first time, give you the legal authority to do what you have been doing and what you are trying to do now in direct violation of your oath of office to defend the entire Constitution of the United States, not just the parts you happen to approve of. So go ahead, go to the American people and tell them that ultimate power is no longer to be vested in the people who can't be trusted with that power according to you. Tell them only the government can have that power now. You go out there and try to convince the people of the 38 states that you're going to need to get that amendment passed to agree with your opinion of them versus their opinion of you. I dare you. 12 million unarmed men, women, and children were unable to resist being murdered by their own National Socialist government in Germany. Perhaps 50 million unarmed men, women, and children were murdered by their own Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. 50 million Chinese murdered by their own government under Mao, who also disarmed his people. And in Cuba, and in Vietnam, and in the killing fields of Cambodia. Now you say that can't happen here? You say we're protected? By what? By the Constitution that you're in the process of destroying? You are in violation of your oaths of office by so much as introducing this legislation, let alone passing it. My fellow Americans, the previous inhabitants of this chamber watched as 100 million people were murdered after being disarmed by their own governments. Every single one of those men, women, and children were as real and precious and irreplaceable as the children at Newtown. And I tell you here and now, that I will be damned if I will let that happen to the American people.
Take a look at how one city has been able to curb gun violence.
Firearm offenders who are out free walking the streets of Richmond right now.
Bogan sent his staff out to invite those young men to City Hall and offer them a deal. The ONS would pay them a stipend and help them with basic goals like getting a driver's license, GED, or health care. In return, they asked them to stop shooting.
When you clearly articulate to them, they're promoting amongst themselves self-genocide. You're killing yourselves. Because not only were 87% of the young men who died on the streets of Richmond looking like you, black and brown young men, they were more than likely killed by someone who looks like you too. And quite frankly, what sense does that make?
So when he was letting us know that thing, it embarrassed me in a way, because it was like, man, it seemed like we just out here some savages, and we're not. I know I'm not. And I know a lot of people around me, not too. It's just the environment you in, man. It's like, we was born in this, and this is what we know, and we know. Because out here, you can't have a heart. Well, let me rephrase that. You can have a heart, but you can't show it.
The most dramatic change was around what happened in their lives. I mean, I watched these people who I knew were involved in violence stop shooting. What I found unique about ONS is that they are actually working with the people who caused the violence. You know, you see these young men out there on the street, people are afraid of them. And it's hard to help someone who terrifies you.
Okay, this is a chart, and it is basically looking at the different states that have tighter gun control methods than other states that don't, and which states have less gun violence. So this is Brady's campaign best and worst states. Violent crime ranking blue is safer and red less safe. And this is the FBI top 10 most dangerous states. So you look at California, that's in red, and it has one of the toughest gun laws. You look at Maryland, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, Delaware, Arizona, Alaska, and Kansas. Those are the states that are less safe, but they have more gun violence, even though their gun laws are stricter than the states that are in blue. Now, does that make sense to you? If we can't defend ourselves against people that are shooting at us in our cars or on the street, we're sitting ducks. And that's basically what's happening. So we're going to go back on this chart, and you're going to see it right from the beginning, because it's quite interesting, really.
And I want to take these myths to task and maybe dispel them, not through innuendo and half-truth, but through logic and math. Now, one myth that they all love to spread is that stricter gun laws help stop violent crime. Therefore, states with stricter gun laws should have less violent crime. The Brady campaign even rates states by how strict their gun laws are. If you have strict gun laws, you're a good state. If you have loose gun laws, you're a bad state. They make a list. They rank them from 1 through 50. The lower the number, the better. If you are in their top 10, that means you have the strictest gun laws and therefore should have the lowest accounts of violent crime. If you're in the lower 10, say 41 through 50, you have the loosest gun laws and therefore, by logic of what they say, you should have the highest violent crime rates. Now, before I go on with this video, I want to say that these lists are taken directly from the Brady campaign's website. I was reading the Brady campaign website, and I found this list on there, so I started doing a little bit of digging. Now, the numbers I use along with their list are compilations of data from the FBI, the United States Census, etc. Now, I tried to use numbers that were from the same year. So there might be numbers out there that are a little bit different than the numbers I show you, but remember, these are from a couple of studies that combine all the relative available data and are from the same year. But I've noticed that even when there is a year difference, there doesn't seem to be much change. Like maybe one state will switch places with the state above or below it. But other than that, the states on the list stay pretty much the same. The rankings stay pretty much the same on both lists. So that being said, let's continue with the video. Let's take a look at that Brady campaign list of best and worst states right now. Let's look at their best states and their worst states. Their 10 best and their 10 worst. Now, when you look at their 10 best, it's, of course, California is their number 1. Remember, number 1 is the best state, and number 50 would be the worst. So, like I said, in number 1 is California, and it goes down through Connecticut, New Jersey, Maryland, New York, Massachusetts, Hawaii, Illinois, Rhode Island, and Delaware. Those are the states with the tightest, most restrictive gun laws. Therefore, by their logic, they should have the lowest violent crime rates. And if you go over to their worst list here and you work your way up from, I guess, the least of the worst up to the worst in the 50 position, you work your way up from Utah, Montana, Kentucky, Kansas, Mississippi, Vermont, South Dakota, Wyoming, Alaska, and finally in the worst position, Arizona. These states have the loosest gun laws and therefore, by logic, should have the highest crime rates. Now let's actually look at how each one of these states ranks as far as violent crime is concerned. Which ones have the highest and lowest occurrences of violent crime per capita? Surely the 10 best states will have the lowest rates and the 10 worst states will have the highest rates. Now in this category, the higher your number, the better. The higher your number, that means the less violent you are. If you're number 1, that means you have the highest violent crime rate. If you're number 50, that means you have the lowest violent crime rate. Now when I put these numbers in, any number that's 26 through 50, meaning they're safer than that medium divide, they're going to be in blue. Any number that's 25 through 1, meaning that they are less safe or more violent than that median divider, they're going to be in red. Surely there'll be more red under the worst states than there is under the best states. But when you put the numbers in here, immediately you see there are twice as many red numbers over on the Brady 10 best states than there are in the Brady 10 worst states. That just doesn't make sense. If stricter gun laws mean less violent crime, then why are there twice as many states that have higher violent crime rates in their best states list than there is in their worst states list? It doesn't make sense. In fact, if you just look at the best state, the number one state, the best state that Brady ranks, California, it's number 14 in violent crime. If you look at the state they list last, dead last, number 50, as being the worst state, which is Arizona, it ranks 16 in violent crime. That's 2 positions apart. The one that's the number one state is 2 positions worse than the state that's in last place as far as Brady is concerned. That also doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And if you look at the state on each list that has the highest violent crime rate, it's an even bigger difference in the way opposite of what you would think. Delaware, under Brady's 10 best states, is the 7th most violent state in the union, where over here on the worst states list, it's still Arizona at 16. That's an even bigger difference that doesn't make sense. In fact, when you look at the Brady 10 worst states list, the states that should, by Brady logic, have the worst violent crime rates, 6 of the states that make up this list of 10 also make up 60% of the top 10 safest states in the union.
So it is my logical conclusion that these states that allow people to have guns, which is our right, there's kind of a how do you say, maybe a fear that someone nearby may be carrying a concealed weapon, and if you're starting to shoot at people, you might get shot yourself. Well, that fear is greatly diminished in California because most of us don't carry guns. It's just too difficult to carry guns, and particularly concealed weapons. You have to go through psychological tests and all that. So in Washington, you're allowed to have a concealed weapon. I have a concealed weapon permit in Washington. And as I've stated before, my gun saved my life. And there was no one around to save me when my gun saved my life. So we're asking policemen to carry guns. We're asking them to put their lives, for us. But we're just learning how to be little helpless creatures that get shot at instead of becoming warriors who are aware, who are watching, who know how to use our guns. That's what America needs to be. And Obama and every president needs to invite the American people to be part of protecting our country and each other from terrorist attacks or from anyone attacking another human being. We need to step up to the plate and become a brave citizenry. Whether it's taking karate lessons or whatever weapon you want to choose, we need to be a strong nation, not a nation of weaklings, which in my opinion is where we're being led to be. So it doesn't, I think we need to understand, as much as we think we can get rid of all the guns and live peacefully and happily ever after, that's just not our nature. And there will always be the criminals that will be selling silencers to children. You can't stop it any more than the drug war can stop drugs. It's just always going to be there. And even more so, the more we are not allowed to defend ourselves. So it's very, very important that our government includes us instead of trying to, through the media, separate us and make us feel like some force outside of ourselves has to protect us. Thanks for watching.
A gun buyback that forced law-abiding citizens to surrender their firearms in a nationwide roundup and meltdown of all semi-automatic firearms and pump-action rifles and shotguns. 640,000 ordinary conventional firearms confiscated, and destroyed.
It was an absolute joke and a tragedy. I actually turned in 3 firearms, and it broke my heart.
I mean, it was 40 years of collecting, and I can't say it any other way than that. I felt sick. I had to hand them in, because if I didn't, I was going to jail.
There's no ifs or buts about that. By taking that gun away from me, they've stolen something from me.
A right stolen by their government, promising safety in return for its gun bans. But now citizens know the frightening truth. The cost of lost liberty can be measured in the loss of life.
It's become very, very obvious, even to Blind Freddy, that the expenditure of $500 million has done absolutely nothing to reduce crime.
It certainly didn't do what the government touted it would do, which was to reduce crime. It hasn't done that at all. In fact, there's been more.
This has been a lot of bull and hasn't really done much to help society and with its problems.
Cold, hard facts the anti-gun forces can no longer escape. Armed robberies have skyrocketed, up 69%. Assaults involving guns rose 28%. Gun murders increased 19%. And a new phenomenon, home invasions jumped 21%. An increase politicians insist they can't explain because they're still trying to legally define what a home invasion is and what the penalty should be.
Part of the difficulty is that there is no clear definition of home invasion in the law.
Never cease to be amazed at the ingenuity of lawyers.
If the politicians want a pay rise, boom, that's done in 20 minutes. But to define home invasion, what a joke.
I have no trouble at all in defining what a home invasion is. I think if someone sets their foot inside your door uninvited, they are invading your home and your privacy.
And victims who have survived home invasions don't need a definition. They've lived through hours of terror. Arthur Field was tied up, his hands and feet taped, his phone lines cut, while 2 robbers ransacked his house.
And they jumped on me and knelt on my chest and grabbed me around the throat because I immediately started calling out, "Help."
I don't know how many men, they start smashing the windows. There was a lot of glass shattering, a lot of noise outside, and I stood in the kitchen, I was trembling.
The Zawadzkis remember thugs running through their home, demanding money and threatening to kill them. Mr. Zawadsky says if he had a firearm, the suspects never would have gotten away.
Do you will stand, waiting till you get killed? Or you will defend yourself? Tell me true, you will defend yourself.
Scars that never heal. Citizens left powerless. But it's criminals who have been empowered and emboldened by the new gun laws because the innocent can't fight back.
What's happening today is that the offender, the bad guys, are happy to break into somebody's house. They're not frightened to break into somebody's house while they're at home.
Citizens deny the right to protect themselves by a justice system that won't.
Well, my opinion of the legal system here is it's absolutely weak. Weak as water. I mean, it's because they've just got no backbone. That the sentencing for various crimes is just pathetic.
And police who can't. They're undermanned and morale has never been lower.
It's very bad at the moment. It's never been worse. Since 1993, we've had a real decrease in over 230 sworn police officers in this state.
These policemen have joined the job, policewomen have joined the job to go out and do it, and they can't even attend at breaks or assaults because there's no vehicle to even get them there. I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous.
Gun laws that have backfired. And Australians who have been forced to hide behind bars and deadbolts. Some are even installing extensive security systems because the firearms they still own that haven't been banned have to be locked up, unloaded, and unavailable.
I mean, get real. If I have someone break in here, I've got to go get the bolt, get the rifle, find the ammunition somewhere else, put it all together, and then defend myself. If this other person's got a firearm, it's going to threaten my life. No way. It doesn't bloody add up.
A political fraud. Gun bans that haven't made a difference, and gun owners now struggling to stop a growing momentum against them.
The people pushing the removal of guns from the Australian society are already saying that's only the first step, publicly, that's only the first step. Now we want the handguns, we want every other firearm.
Their warning to Americans: don't think it can't happen to you.
Hitler had a law that citizens couldn't have guns either. So you see, history can and is repeating itself. I am showing you the lawlessness of our government, how it allows employees such as the BLM to slaughter our wild horses illegally, spend our tax dollars to slaughter these horses even though it's illegal. And not all people in government are bad, don't get me wrong, but there are criminals in the government, and our U.S. Attorney, Loretta Lynch, refuses to prosecute them because the government doesn't like to prosecute its own kind, even if they are criminals. And this is the problem. So as long as our government knows that we as citizens can defend ourselves, even against them, they don't want the embarrassment of Russia and and China and other countries to watch our citizens defend ourselves against our government. That's just something, I think that's the only thing that stops them from getting worse for the most part. So hang on to your guns and learn how to use them, and fight against extreme gun laws that aren't going to do any good anyway, because unless we can get rid of the black market, we will always be susceptible to the outlaws who have guns. I myself wish we never had to have guns. I wish we could be a peaceful, loving society, and one day we will. But we're not there yet. What we have to do is to defend each other from those criminals, whether they be citizens or government officials alike. Thanks for watching.
It can, and it already is.
Unless you, as a firearms owner, get off your butt now and start to oppose those that want to take them off of you right here and now, I would say that within 5 to 10 years, the restrictions on gun owners in America will be similar to what happens in Australia.
Don't trust your politicians. Get in there, keep on their backs. Be a member of the NRA, be a member of your local gun club.
Be part of the NRA and never, ever, ever give up your freedoms, because that's, in the end, that's all you've got.
If you think you have rights, tomorrow the government can take them away from you.
I think the Americans have to be very, very careful, because, you know, their rights will be quickly eroded as ours have, and we don't have a chance in hell of getting those rights back.
It's disgusting that almost every day we learn of another person being terrorised, robbed and attacked in their home.
For Christ's sake, get a bit of vision. We want justice.
Carrying signs and chanting, "We want justice," more than 2,000 angry Australians delivered a personal message to Parliament's doorstep. They're fed up with false promises and sick and tired of living in fear.
We want justice.
The bottom line is people want to know that they have a right to defend themselves.
We come from a small country town, and it started happening there, and like, just with having a 6-week-old baby, I like to know that I can protect her, and that we feel safe in our own home.
I would say that the politicians in this country, in Australia, have missed the boat entirely, and they've harmed a lot of people who didn't deserve harming with their laws and their approach to it.
A gun buyback.
Stay tuned for part 2. You're watching Meet America. Thanks for watching.